I'm eating egg whites and hoping the building will collapse. Hello, babies, and welcome back to D-Talk, your safe space to explore your creativity, expand your critical thinking skills, embrace your cringe, and prime yourself for connection. My name is David, and today we are going to talk about having a growth mindset. Thank you so much for joining me here, babies. Whether you're watching on YouTube or listening on Spotify, I'm so glad you're here. This topic of growth mindset is something that is very important to me, and I'm interested in talking about it. It's something that I've developed within myself. I feel like it's given me a lot of success, both personally and professionally, but I also see this idea of growth mindset kind of hijacked, bastardized by some institutions. Sometimes it's not always a positive thing. So we're going to get into that and discuss the different ways that a growth mindset can be of service to you as an individual moving around the world, or how it might be something that is used in a negative way, almost to bully yourself. Now, we've talked a lot on this podcast about using other folks to bully yourself, and it's something that I'm very mindful of because I see how hard we are on ourselves. So I want to make this caveat right in the beginning here that it's possible that you can use a growth mindset to be exceedingly hard on yourself, and there are a number of pitfalls that you can fall into when it comes to the growth mindset. And of course, we're going to discuss those together here today. I'm really out here serving non-binary tea, right? The fully drag painted face with like the collared shirt. Don't let the collared shirt fool ya. Don't let the smooth taste fool ya. I'm still out here doing all this other stuff. Okay, so I'd like to start this pod off with a quote. Persistence is not very glamorous. If genius is 1% inspiration and 99% perspiration, then as a culture, we tend to glamorize the 1%. We love its flash and dazzle, but great power lies in the other 99%. And it's definitely something, especially with the rise of social media, that we see, because social media tends to be, and I believe rightfully so, a curated collection of people's best moments. And there is something to be said for being vulnerable online and sharing your story if you think it would help others, but it is definitely a line of like what you find appropriate to be sharing online. And people are usually only sharing their wins online, and you wouldn't go out of your way, at least I wouldn't, to publish my flops. Except for when I make YouTube videos looking at my past flops, because we can monetize those flops. But what else are we doing with those flops? You know, we all flop. We all flop hard. It's true. Because life is a collection of flops with some wins kind of just interspersed around all of them. We're always failing. We're always messing up. We're always making mistakes. And the important part is not only how you think about those mistakes, but what you do after you make the mistake. I'm already stepping on myself here with the neuroscience research that I went through. So let's go ahead and let's define what a growth mindset is, because there's a chance you don't know what it is, or there's a chance that you might know the wrong version. So we're going to look at some ideas here, and we're going to give a fixed mindset, which is the opposite of a growth mindset, and then we're going to give the growth mindset kind of version of what that kind of thinking looks like. A fixed mindset would be somebody that avoids challenges, right? You're not interested in trying things that you know you won't be good at, which is severely limiting, but we're going to keep going. And the growth mindset version of that is somebody that views challenges as opportunities, right? So a whole lot of this, like we're talking about here, it's a mindset. It's all in your head. It's all the ways that you view your experience and the ways that you move around the world. The next one for the fixed mindset says you refuse to receive criticism or feedback. Ooh, we've all been there. Maybe we haven't all been there. I've been there. I lived there. I grew up there. I wasn't willing to listen to any feedback, and it just made me nervous and terrified. And the growth mindset version of that would be somebody that embraces constructive feedback. You want it. You go out of your way to solicit it. You're interested in it. You don't always have to accept it, but you do always have to listen and take it in and consider it, because we're using your critical thinking and discernment skills, which are exceedingly important if you're a human being who is moving around the world. Okay, the next one is focusing on proving yourself. Ooh, yeah. It just brings up so many questions. Like, who are you proving yourself? Are you proving yourself to yourself? Yeah. Does that make sense? Are you proving yourself to yourself? That's messy. Are you proving yourself to others? Why do you want the approval of others? Why are you withholding your approval to your own self? That's harmful in itself. But that loops back to bullying yourself. Okay. But then the growth mindset version of that is focusing on the process and not the result. Fixed mindset, you feel threatened by others' success. Growth mindset, you're inspired by other success. Fixed mindset, you can't accept failures or mistakes. Growth mindset, you learn and grow from failures. Fixed mindset, you shy away from unfamiliar things. Growth mindset, always step out of the comfort zone. Fixed mindset, believe that talent is static. growth mindset, believe that talent is ever improving. That's something that came up in the research that I did time and time again, is that people with fixed mindsets have this idea that you have these innate talents, right? We don't subscribe to religion on this podcast, but like this idea of your God-given talents, right? The things that you're born with, like you're just born a great singer. And sure, there can be things that predispose you to being good at any such given thing, like a swimmer with big old hands that can push the water, science and physics, what have you. There are things that predispose you to be better at things, but I really do believe, and maybe it's because I'm so personally infused in this growth mindset kind of attitude, in that hard work beats out talent 10 times out of 10. It just does. I know so many talented people that don't work hard. Oh, that sounds so bad. I know people that are super talented that don't work hard. And like, that sounds so crazy to say, but it is true. And at some point in my life, I've been that person too. But those talents, you weren't born with those talents. You weren't born with those talents. Talent is something that you have to develop. And this is a spoiler alert for you, is that I fully subscribe to the growth mindset, and it's something that I've internalized, and it's something that I use in my life on a regular basis solely for the purpose that I enjoy the way it makes me feel. It makes me have it gives me a more livable life experience that just leads to me being happier. And that's the discernment that you need right now as the listener, in that if these things sound like they won't help you, well, I also think you need to be critical of that, because sometimes we don't know what's good for us. But if you try it out and you're in there and you're using it in non-effective ways that is essentially tearing yourself down instead of bringing yourself up, then I think you need to take a step back and really have a look at what you're doing, because it is possible that it's not for you, or rather it is quite possible that you're using it in ways that aren't conducive to living a happier life. So now that we're laying the groundwork of what a growth mindset is, I have a few quotes that I'm going to read to you from some famous people that seemingly are talking about the growth mindset without actually explicitly mentioning growth mindset. Number 1, do the best you can until you know better. Then when you know better, do better. Maya Angelou. This is a really interesting one, because a lot of the times we're paralyzed by fear of judgment and whatever you're paralyzed by when you have a talent, an interest, a hobby, something that you enjoy doing, but you don't feel like you're good at it, or rather you don't feel like you're good enough at it to bring it to a stage. And not like a stage that it has to be a performative aspect, but to put it on Instagram, or to show your friends and family, or to show your rabbits, or anything, right? Sometimes we get bogged down with this idea of like, I'm not good at something, so there's no point in me trying to share my art because I don't judge it as good enough. And we need to keep in mind that we are our harshest critics. We are our own harshest critics when it comes to the art that we create. And like my face, for example, right now, if you're listening on Spotify, I have a full face of makeup on, so that's what I'm talking about. There are problems that I see on my face, but you probably don't, because you didn't paint this face. You know what I mean? Like those small little eyebrow differences, now you can tell because I just told you, but we recognize things about our own productivity, our own lives, our own art, because we are the artist. It is like we talked about 2 weeks ago in the episode about going out alone. It does involve this presence of the spotlight effect, in that we think that everybody is viewing us in the same way that we view ourselves. And sometimes that's a good thing, because if you have a good self-conception, thinking that everybody thinks the same way about you is great. But if you have low self-esteem and low confidence, and then you think everybody else also thinks the same thing about you, that can get really dangerous and messy really fast. Okay, here's the next one. There's nothing noble in being superior to your fellow people. True nobility is being superior to your former self. Ernest Hemingway. Now this one, right? You're only in a race against yourself. And a big thief of joy is comparison. So if you're comparing yourself to others, it's really hard to get caught in this loop of like, oh, well, how come they're so much better at this than me? And I wonder what God-given talents they have that I don't have that can help bridge the discrepancy in talent that I'm seeing on paper or on video, or maybe even in real life. But the hard thing about this is that there's no way that you can understand the extenuating circumstances of anybody's life that has brought them to the moment to produce the art that you are judging yourself by. You know, like people have whole entire lives and so many experiences that we're not aware of. And you know what? Thank God for that, because we don't want to be aware of everybody's everything. But you need to take that and then internalize it to think, I wonder how hard they've worked to get to this spot. And I felt this specifically with drag, because that's the thing that I've been working the most diligently on in the last few months. Well, I guess that's not even true either. I think about it in like terms of my YouTube content and my Instagram and TikTok presence and that. But like, okay, so if I'm watching a drag performance and somebody is just slaying the house down boots, I might look at that and go, ugh, I suck. You know what I mean? Like you watch somebody do something that you're interested in doing, but they do it so much better than you. And that comparison can really rob you of your joy in the moment. And that's this idea of the growth mindset and fixed mindset. Because a fixed mindset person would look at that and go, oh, I suck. You know, and we all fall into that. Like, again, don't listen to this thinking like David's got it all figured out. I'm just some girl with a microphone, a headache, and too many opinions. Like, it's not that deep, but I am here to present this information to you because I am a different person right now sitting in front of you with this gorgeous face on than I was even a handful of years ago because of my work on the growth mindset. So you can take it from me, but also don't take it from me. You know, use your discernment. I need that on a t-shirt. Use your discernment. But at the end of the day, you're only in competition with yourself. So take pictures, take videos, keep track of everything that you're doing when it comes to your art, when it comes to your everything, right? Journal, write things down, take voice recordings, like do whatever you can to keep track of where you are. Because we have such a small close-up vision of who we are and how we're evolving, sometimes it's really hard to see those changes unless they're really big. And we don't really have big changes, but somebody who doesn't see you that often can look at you and go, wow, that's so much different. You know what I mean? Like I'm looking at my makeup job right now and I'm thinking, yeah, it looks good, whatever, you know. But somebody who only saw me in drag like a couple of months ago could go, wow, like your face has really improved and changed. And you know, even as I'm looking in the monitor right now, like, oh God, I got really smooth skin. I got really smooth skin. And you know what? It's all a lie. It's all a lie. I found a pore filling primer, changed my life. Look into it if you're somebody with skin. Because why? Everybody has pores. It's a fact of life, darling. Everybody has a slightly wonky everything. And as soon as you can acknowledge that, you'll have a better life experience. But I'm getting carried away, which is my right here on my podcast. Okay, number 3, stay afraid, but do it anyway. What's important is the action. We don't have to wait to be confident, just do it, and eventually the confidence will follow. Right? What's that cliche? Fear doesn't mean not being afraid, or courage doesn't mean not being afraid. Courage means being afraid and doing it anyway, you know? It's super cliche and overused, but it is the truth. It is the truth because if you're waiting for some perfect moment for you to be able to jump in and do something and feel perfectly ready and not anxious at all to do something, you might be waiting forever. In fact, you will probably always be waiting forever for that perfect moment because there is no perfect moment. The perfect moment is right now. And the second perfect moment was yesterday, right? So like, get started. Start it. Do it. You can do it. Whatever you're thinking right now in your head of like, oh, I wonder if David's talking about this. Yeah. That's what I'm talking about. As long as it's legal. Let me put that in there. God, content creation is so interesting because people can just clip whatever they want and then make you say whatever they want you to say. Interesting. Thanks a lot, Obamacare. Next up, number 4 says, one can choose to go back towards safety or forward towards growth. Growth must be chosen again and again. Fear must be overcome again and again. And this is it right there. This is that good stuff right there. I think about this for me in terms of performing because in my first, 20 performances as a drag artist, I would black out. I wouldn't remember what I did. The number would end and I'd be standing there getting critiques. If I was at TGT, I would be standing there getting critiques if it was a show that was a competition and I would be getting critiques and my legs would be shaky and I would just kind of come back to life going, what did I just do? I don't remember it, which is another plug here for you to record what you're doing and take proof and create actual proof of what you're doing because it's super easy to disassociate because you're scared. And that's something that I was doing for a long time. And then I slowly would get out of it. But there was a point where I was thinking to myself, am I always going to be this terrified on stage? That's exhausting. Am I always going to wake up on a show day and just feel this overwhelming wash of anxiety over my entire body? Because this is exhausting and I can't do this forever. And it is different for everybody too. It might last for longer. It might last longer for you than it will for other people. And it comes down to so many things that ultimately you don't have control over, but there are a lot of things that you do have control over. And I think that's what we should be focused on. Number 5, I hate to quote Oprah, but she said, we can't become what we need to be by remaining who we are. Super cliche, but I kind of liked it, so I put it in there. Next up, number 6. When we're growing up, there are all sorts of people telling us what to do when really we need the space to work out who to be. Okay, the next one says, if there is no struggle, there is no progress. The next one says, permit yourself to change your mind when something is no longer working for you. You know, this is the fallacy of spent time. If you've spent an amount of time doing something and it's clearly not working, you have to be able to take a step back and go, is this really working for me? Do I need to keep doing it in this same way to expect a different result from it? Because who was was the person that said doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different result is crazy or something, some such thing like that. But it is true. If you're doing the same thing and you're not getting the results that you want over a reasonable amount of time, because if you do something once, if you put like 8 minutes of effort into something and it's like, no practice, only good. You know what I mean? You know that attitude? You probably know that attitude. We all know that attitude. We've been there. The next one says, be not afraid of growing slowly. Be afraid only of standing still. And then the last one says, though no one can go back and make a brand new start, anyone can start from now and make a brand new ending. And how gorgeous is that sentence? I love that so much because, again, we can look back and go, oh, I wish I did that. Why didn't I do that from the beginning? Like, I'm hard on myself thinking like, why didn't I start my YouTube channel earlier? Why didn't I start my podcast earlier? Why didn't I start putting myself out there earlier? And really, it comes down to because I wasn't ready. And it's this delicate line between the ideas of things happen exactly when they need to be, and also this amount of like self-ownership you have over your own life. And so you can start to see where this self-criticism can come in and really take over, and it can be really problematic. So you need to take all of this with a grain of salt and use your discernment. I swear, I'm not going to say salt or discernment one more time in this podcast. And as we're talking about the challenges of a growth mindset, here are some things that I found in my research. It reads like this. Continual negative experiences grind us down. A personally disappointing grade on a test might not seem so important at the beginning of the year, but if it continues as the year progresses and exams begin to loom, learned helplessness begins to creep in, and it becomes increasingly difficult to maintain that growth mindset. Those with a growth mindset tend to be more resilient and willing to take on challenges, but they also may be more prone to overestimating their abilities and taking on too much at once. So this idea of burnout. This is also another podcast topic I'm interested in bringing to life, because burnout is absolutely a thing, and it might be a struggle for people who struggle with attention disorders as well. I definitely fit into that category, but my idea of I can do all of this because it only comes down to hard work, and I'm a hard worker, and I participate in capitalism, and productivity is a way in which I glean a lot of my self-worth, which is super harmful. But sometimes I have harnessed that in positive ways and in negative ways, but the challenge is deciphering what is harmful and what is positive, because it's not always easy. So if you want to participate in a growth mindset, you have to accept your flaws and you have to accept your mistakes as opportunities to improve, right? You need to see that your setbacks are a part of the learning process, because our entire job as a human being on this earth is to fumble around, trying new things, learning, coming back, taking breaks, take a step away and come back to things too is really important in my experience. You need to embrace these challenges, and you need to be prepared for yourself to fail, right? Because it's really hard, because a lot of people have this aversion to failure, and I'm in that category too. I get sometimes pretty frustrated when I fail at something that I'm attempting to do, but it's sometimes we don't even realize how our brain is rewiring itself as we're making those mistakes to make the right choices in the future. And it comes back to the taking breaks. You need to actually sleep, take a break, think about different things for your brain to fully rewire, and then the garbage gets taken out. And that's not even me being hyperbolic. When you sleep, there are little things that go around in your brain and clear out the neural trash. It's not a joke. That's a real thing. So if you're not having a good sleep schedule, if you're not prioritizing sleep in your life, I know this is sounding soapboxy right now, but sleep is so important, and it is something that I've struggled with in the past too, because of my use of caffeine and nicotine and anxiety and cannabis and all of these things, right? It's all very cyclical, as everything is in the world. It's all painfully related. Like I said before, you need to see intelligence as something that can be developed, because it's easy to take a step back and disassociate from watching a really good performance, from reading a really good book and going, well, I can't do that, and I don't have any control over it, so I might as well just concede and not try anything because I fear disappointment, and I don't want to fail, right? But those unreasonable expectations that we put on ourselves to do good things when we haven't practiced how to do things good, I just wanted to conjugate that in the same way, even though that sounded like a 4-year-old talking, but hey, you're probably used to it at this point. I flip-flop so hard between like science, between like neuroscience language and really like technical big words, and sounding like a child, which is probably the vulnerability the judges are looking for. So I hope you're enjoying that. Okay, so the first one that we're really going to dive into and get deeper with is embracing failure. So this idea of like, I've always had a growth mindset. So sometimes people confuse a growth mindset with being flexible and open-minded or having a positive outlook. And these are qualities that they believe they've always had. So it's not necessarily this idea of like, I'm a positive person, and toxic positivity is another whole issue that we're not going to get into today. But Some people have this false growth mindset. We're actually all a mixture of growth and fixed mindsets when it comes to different things. Because, for example, I have a really big growth mindset when it comes to my makeup and my performances and my drag in this, but I have a really fixed mindset when it comes to things that seem more basic and have less of an interpretation of what is good and what is bad. So an example would be like making mistakes, like missing a credit card payment, right? When it had nothing to do with me not having the money to make the payment, I just missed the deadline, right? Or like my school fees are due tomorrow and I totally forgot that those were due and I need to do that, right? Or like I didn't make the phone call to change the water bill, or I still haven't canceled that Wi-Fi. I have a really low tolerance for things like that for myself, and that is related to a fixed mindset. I just get really hard on myself, being like, David, it's not even something that's difficult. But again, you can have task paralysis, and that's a whole other thing. I just keep talking about things we're not going to talk about here. Look at me being hard on myself. I should practice what I'm preaching. So you have to keep in mind that there is no final conclusion when it comes to developing a growth mindset. You'll always slip back into old patterns of thinking. It's just how our brains work. You're never fully out of something until you're never fully out of something. There's no final, completely realized version of yourself that you're in search of. You're just constantly in competition with who you were yesterday, because even what you might conceptualize as your final realized perfect version of yourself, as you keep growing, you're going to get smarter and you're going to be able to conceptualize yourself in a way that's better than what you think right now. The hard part is to keep pushing through those challenges in search of a self that is more developed than yesterday. So the next one is a growth mindset is not just about praising and rewarding effort. And this kind of comes about when we're talking about the growth mindset when it comes to the other people that you're around, because I don't know if you feel this. You're probably a queer person listening to this. Maybe you're not. And if you're not, I'm so glad you're here. Well, I'm happy the queer folks are here too. It's just more expected that you're here. Anyway, I'm getting off track. Is like if you're around groups of people, it's really common to see people's fixed mindset, especially in the queer community. And this can be, and I look at this from the perspective of being a teacher, because to be completely effing honest with you, I didn't have the skills to employ a growth mindset until I was an elementary teacher. And specifically, it was when I was teaching grade 2 that I was teaching this growth mindset to my students, because I was quite easily able to recognize that these kids are so paralyzed by fear and making mistakes that they just sit there doing nothing. And that got them nowhere. And I was like, kids, how can I help you if you're not even making mistakes? You're just sitting there not doing it. How can I help you if you're not actually out there attempting new things and making those mistakes, right? So it's true for students in schools. It's true for employees and organizations. It's true for everybody. And I do believe, like, when we start getting farther into this and I talk about students, we are all students. If you're a human being, you're a student. You're a student of the universe. Our job as human beings is to learn and to figure things out. So that's what I'm referencing here when I talk about students. But we can't forget that outcomes matter. It's not like we're completely throwing out the window, arriving at an actual outcome. Because if you're too deep into this growth mindset and you're thinking every mistake is just another cobblestone in the yellow brick road that is my continual growth, and I'm so okay with never reaching any specific outcome, that's not really the growth mindset either. Is that it is still helpful to kind of pin in your mind what your goals look like, because you can reach those goals, but you can also get halfway to those goals and kind of rework them and go, okay, that's actually not what I'm going for. And I've done that so many times in my life, especially when it comes to my drag. I had this idea of what my final product was going to look like, and that's actually not at all what I want from drag based off of what I think now. Because furthermore, you can get caught up in this like unproductive kind of effort of like spreading yourself too thin. Again, we're relating to burnout, but doing things that aren't actually pushing you towards your goal, but because you're so deep in this growth mindset, you think anything I do is going to help me, right? So like styling this wig is going to make me a better dancer. Like, oh, I don't know about that. And that's a really obvious example, but sometimes it's easy to rationalize the ways in which we are engaging in activities because we feel bad about them, because they feel wasteful, because of the capitalistic environment that we feel pressured on us, that it doesn't feel productive. You have to be able to recognize what behavior and what mistakes are going to specifically get you closer to the goals that you're interested in reaching. So you have to emphasize the process that is going to get you to those end goals, right? So seeking help from others, trying new strategies, capitalizing on setbacks, and in all of the research, the outcome, the bottom line, it follows from deeply engaging in every process. So this is being present with yourself, at all times. It's super hard. Disassociation is absolutely a thing. I struggle with it. I gave you the example of me blacking out on stage. Thankfully, that doesn't happen anymore, but it's a reality that a lot of us face. And sometimes there are other things here that are in place. Like, I'm not giving this advice to somebody that has like a neurological condition or a mental health condition that precludes you from doing this, but I am here to slightly challenge you to think about the ways in which you might be absolving yourself of any personal responsibility because of the things about you that you can't change. Because self-empowerment is something that can be very motivating and powerful if you use it in ways of motivation and not tearing yourself down, right? We have to be positive about these things. So you have to get yourself into this rich, valuable growth zone, right? The proximal zone of development. So in order to be in this growth zone, you have to be able to recognize the triggers that make you feel good or bad about any situation. So a lot of leaders have benefited from learning to recognize when their fixed mindset comes in, and you have to be able to name it and tame it and then kind of pass it on, right? If you ignore it, it's not going to go away. It's in fact going to get worse. So you have to be able to recognize it. But the challenge is being present to recognize when you are being rigid, right? Sometimes we are rigid where we can be flexible. And if you don't have enough self-awareness to be able to notice that in those moments, it's really hard to get out of it. So bringing your attention back to yourself and your own feelings, having the ability to talk about your emotions, and more importantly, name them. Sometimes we can't even name the feelings that we're having. I've known people like this in my life where they're frustrated, but they actually can't even talk about their frustration. And it's not that they don't want to, they don't have the actual skills to be able to name the feelings that they're feeling, which was a wild concept to me because I'm a talker. You get it. You're listening to my podcast right now, but I've always found interest in being able to describe myself and my emotions. Haven't always had the skills, but I do now. And I'm very thankful for that. Wasn't born with it. It was Maybelline. It was things that I worked on myself because I saw value in it. And I did that for me. And I did that for myself, right? But that is to say, you don't want it to all feel good, right? Because if you're constantly feeling good about your progress towards a goal, you might want to challenge yourself a little bit more. It has to be this delicate balance of feeling a little bit challenged and a little bit confident in what you're doing at all times. And that's really hard to manage. That's where knowing yourself comes in. And also, right, because if you go too hard in the other direction, if you're having a lot of bad days, it's going to lead to burnout, and it might be a signal to turn it down a notch. There has to be this nice, delicate balance for you to be in this growth zone or the zone of proximal development. But the most important thing here is this rule of thirds, and it can shift our perspective on the okay days, whether that's in a relationship, a job, chasing down a dream. Those okay days aren't something to shrug off. Be part of your growth process. By shifting this mindset, you can learn to love them too, right? Because that's sometimes how things are encoded. You can have a really good day, you can have a really bad day, or you can have a meh day. And really, the most important days there are those meh days where you can really check in with yourself and kind of fine tune the regulation of whether you're going to push a little bit harder or you're going to pull back a little bit based off of the confidence versus burnout that you're feeling in any given pursuit towards a goal. And the thing is here too is that sometimes we expect our growth to be linear, right? It's always going to be this exponential line that's just going to constantly creep up and up and up. But that's of course not how learning works. That's not really how anything works except age. That never comes down. But you can do something so well and you come back to replicate it and you can't do it anymore. And maybe you have 5 flopinas in a row and then you have a really good one and then another really good one and then a flop and then 4 more really good ones. Like, don't expect your growth to be linear. It's painfully cyclical, just like everything else, because a lot of this is removing the judgment around the way you're performing in any given thing. Because really, if you're putting so much pressure on yourself to be able to be perfect at something, which again, doesn't exist, perfection doesn't exist, but it's kind of the point of life is to be working towards a goal too, right? Because if you accomplished everything that you wanted to do and you made all your dreams and it was all done and you had it tomorrow morning when you woke up, what would you do? What would you do? You wouldn't have anything to do. You'd be so bored. There'd be nothing to do. So like working on a goal can also be like the point of life, you know? So don't pressure yourself because you're not where you want to be because you aren't right now, because part of your whole journey as a human being is to gain those skills that you're interested in working on. And finally, in this section, growth mindset is the belief that intelligence can be nurtured through learning and effort, where intrinsic motivation is the volition to engage in a task for inherent satisfaction. So the last point of this section is that sometimes people confuse intrinsic motivation with a growth mindset, right? Intrinsic motivation is motivation that you feel from within yourself, right? Self-motivating could be a synonym of this as well. But the growth mindset is the belief that intelligence can be nurtured through your learning and your effort and learning from your mistakes, while intrinsic motivation is this idea that you engage in a task to get satisfaction in whatever way. So individuals with growth mindset believe that motivation can be nurtured and that extrinsic motivation can be internalized. So it's this process of taking extrinsic motivation and kind of materializing it in such a way that it can come from within, you. And then the next point of this, which is going to be my segue into the last two sections of this podcast, is dopamine. Da 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 da. We love dopamine in this house. Come on now, girl. Dopamine? Dopa who? Dopa you? Anyway, so I'm going to take a really quick break. We're going to talk about dopamine, a little bit of the neuroscience research that I uncovered in my preparation of this podcast, and then we are going to finish with an opposite perspective. So somebody that thinks a growth mindset is garbageous, they don't think it's a good thing, and I'm here to argue, or rather, they describe all of the ways that growth mindset is not. And that's going to be really important for us because in order to understand something, we need to first understand what it's not. So I'm going to take a break and we will be right back. Okay, babies, we are back. Thanks again so much for joining me. I'm glad that you're here. We're going to continue our conversation with the growth mindset. And like I said, we're going to start with this idea of dopamine. Now, dopamine is the happy chemical in our brains. It's what floods us with happiness when I was going to say smoke a cigarette. That's just my example. But a lot of things give us dopamine, and sometimes it's different for other people. And sometimes it's different for different people. So eating your favorite meal, seeing your favorite person, and some things are just natural that work for most people. So like having a hug that extends beyond 10 seconds can really give a dopamine spike to us just because of human contact, and we're human and humans are social beings. So that's something that can be really dopamine releasing for us. Hitting a goal can be dopamine releasing. Doing something that you enjoy can be dopamine releasing. Like me doing makeup gives me a lot of dopamine. And if you can't make your own dopamine, store-bought is fine. So some people get their dopamine through use of medication prescribed by licensed psychiatrists, and that's a whole other conversation. But dopamine is very important to consider when you are thinking and talking about the growth mindset. So dopamine is considered a key player of intrinsic motivation, and this promotes attentiveness and behavioral engagement, right? Because you need to be attentive, like we said before, and you need to be behaviorally engaged in what you're doing, no matter what you're doing, if it's something that you want to grow in. You need to train yourself. And sometimes there is a level of training that you can do for yourself to engage in these dopamine activities at certain times of your day in order to get like the biggest bang for your buck, as it were. So if I'm sitting on my couch and I just finished a project or just finished editing a video, and let's say it's 8 p.m. and I view my life in blocks of time. So if it's 8 p.m., I usually go to bed around 11 midnight. So I think, okay, I have one more block of time here, and what can I do with it? And I look around my house and I think, okay, what am I actually going to be most interested in doing right now? And it's always different. It's usually always different. Do I want to make some popcorn and relax and chill and watch a movie? Do I want to get out a wig and start teasing her sideways so I can have a nice wig for my next show? Do I want to keep editing? Do I want to scroll Instagram? You really need to be able to be so tuned into yourself that you can look at the things that are a possibility when you have that free time to be able to kind of build this idea of intrinsic motivation and then kind of harness it through this growth mindset lens. Because the problem with this, and you've probably experienced this as well, I have many times, is that if there's something you're interested in doing, and as somebody who struggles with some attention problems, I will sit with my iPad and edit YouTube videos for 12 hours straight and only get up to go to the washroom. Sometimes not even that. I'll just wait till it hurts, then I'll go pee, right? That kind of vibe. So, which is funny to say, but ultimately, when I walk away from that iPad, now I'm annoyed at the iPad. I've spent too much time here. I'm frustrated with it. That dopamine release I got when I started editing is long gone. And now I feel like I overdid it, right? And you've probably had this experience as well. Sometimes if you over-engage in the things that you enjoy doing, you don't enjoy it anymore. And it's kind of the same thing of like smoking cigarettes, is that the first one in the morning tastes the best and it was so good, and you just continuously keep chasing that dopamine high in order to maintain that level of dopamine. But But we get resistance to everything. We build up tolerances to everything. So you can keep chasing that dopamine high. And this kind of plays into addiction as well in the same way. And then you can have dopamine, what is it? Dopamine syndrome? Dopamine syndrome. Is that what it is? Where too much dopamine floods the brain and then that's not good. And then there can be some consequences there. So dopamine is definitely something that you need to consider when you are training yourself to have a growth mindset, if that's something that you're interested in. I want to talk about this study by a person of the name Moser. So the study suggested that individuals with a growth mindset are receptive to corrective feedback, exhibiting a higher error positivity, which is now going to be described for our purposes as PE. The study by Moser suggested that individuals with a growth mindset are receptive to corrective feedback, right? So we've already talked about that. You're able to take feedback. You're not taking it personally. You're able to use it, harness it, discard it, use your discernment. Damn it, I said it. Use your discernment in order to onboard and integrate that information or thank them for that information and move on without using it. And then these people also exhibit a higher PE. Yeah, not PE as in what traumatized me in high school, error positivity. So error positivity is the response that your brain has when you make a mistake. And for the most part, this is something that we have control over as human beings. And it involves the way that we speak to ourselves when we make a problem, when we make a mistake. And this can get a little bit messy and problematic because if you've had people in your life who have been really critical of you, parents, partners, siblings, friends, relationships, anybody, sometimes we internalize that voice and we use other people to bully ourselves. See, it comes back. So be mindful if those subconscious voices that you have in your head, sometimes they don't belong to us. So the only way that you can really figure those out is by being present in your body, which is helpful in pretty much every facet of your life, like we discussed before. So PE means error positivity. So you being able to make a mistake, acknowledge it, not punish yourself for it, and move on. So PE is a waveform response that can actually be measured in the human brain, which is really exciting. And it's correlated with a heightened awareness of our attention to our mistakes. So the problem with this too is sometimes, like those grade 2 students I gave an example of earlier, if you're too worried about a potential mistake that you're not even able to get started in fear of making a mistake, that can be really problematic as well. So having an enhanced PE amplitude was associated with enhanced attention to corrective feedback following errors and subsequent error correction. So being able to meaningfully look at the mistakes that you're making, take on corrective feedback, it really made the difference when you came back to attempt the same thing. So having those people around you that can provide you with corrective feedback, preferably somebody that you respect, because it's hard to take advice from people you don't respect, but it is possible. It's just a lot harder, is something that is very valuable in this pursuit of a growth mindset. And it goes on to say that individuals with a growth mindset are likely to have heightened awareness of and attention to errors, and that growth mindset individuals may neutralize the effect response to negative feedback, which could be indicated by neural activation. So if you have negative feedback, if somebody's being overly critical or saying things that you don't really have control over, you need to be able to respectfully let those go as well. Because some people are really shit at giving feedback, and if they're not doing it in a nice way, or if they're talking about things that you don't have control over, you're not able to actually rework that into your brain and rewire. Like, you can't rewire yourself to be taller, right? You know, things like that you don't have control over. So learners with growth mindset are efficient in error monitoring and receptive to corrective feedback. So this means that a growth mindset has the potential to encourage intrinsically motivated behaviors and promote lifelong learning. So this idea of growth mindset and intrinsic motivation are very connected. So once you can make those connections for yourself, things become a lot easier. But when we're talking about negative feedback and deciding to either take something on or to ignore it, I have an example here. So I've done a show in Calgary, I don't know, probably 15 times at this point. It's called TGT, short for They Got Talent. Takes place in a venue called Dickens, Tuesdays at 8 p.m. It's a great time, great community. If you're interested, if you're from Calgary, come on down. If you're a performer or an audience member, hell, why not be both? It's a great time. But the premise of the show is that people come, they perform a number, and then a judge that is usually different every week picks their favorite. The audience picks their favorite through a vote, and then those top two lip sync together, and then one person wins the episode, and then there's a tournament of champions. It's kind of built like Drag Race. It's a fun time. There was a judge, and this judge was Valerie Hunt. And if you don't know Valerie Hunt, go follow her on Instagram. I don't think she has a TikTok, but Valerie Hunt is one of my favorite Calgary queens. She's one of my favorite queens in general, just such a nice person. And she was judging one day, and she was giving me feedback after a number that was, looking back, that number was a little bit messy, but I wasn't ready to really face that for myself yet. Doesn't matter. Anyway, Valerie Hunt described me as like the pride queen. And like the one, she was like, you're the one that's like here to do the pride mix. And like, you know, you're in rainbows and this and that. And you're like campy and clowny. And I remember being like, oh, that's not what I see myself as. But then as I was taking that feedback, I was just about to throw it out of my mind. And I was just about to ignore that feedback until I went back to the green room and I looked at myself and went, damn, she right. I was in a rainbow sequin dress with some mermaid makeup and like big like teased hair, and I was like, wow, she's right. And I was so close to throwing that away. And she gave me some advice. She was like, what about a natural lip color? Because I was only doing like purples and greens, and look at clock the natural lip, Valerie. Yeah, eat your heart out, girl. No, I love her. Anyway, but I was about to throw out that feedback because I didn't view it as valuable, but I was able to kind of prolong my throwing out of that feedback to take it critically and to kind of put my ego aside. A huge part of this growth mindset is to be able to recognize when your ego is triggered, because that ego is blinding, girl. Sometimes we don't even notice that she's controlling us, but it can be really harmful and hard to recognize when that happens. So like Valerie's advice in that day, even though I didn't want to hear it in the moment, it really made a big difference because I was able to fail forward without my ego kind of taking over and throwing out that advice before I was able to actually understand what she meant, because I was blind to something that I wasn't able to see in myself. And that's normal. We are very bad judges of ourselves, like we said earlier, but it's important to be able to be in a community where you feel safe for people to give you valuable feedback, that you can actually take it even if you don't agree with it when it hits your ear. Back to the study. So it's interesting to note the relationship between the optimal challenge condition and intrinsic motivation using the EEG. So the EEG is what measures brainwaves, right? So this optimal zone of development where you are just perfectly balanced between a little bit challenged and a little bit confident is very important when you're attempting new things. So people perform better when they are optimally challenged, and they have enhanced motivation in experiments where the stimulus preceding negativity, so SPN, is considered to be an electrophysiological indicator of motivation level. So it's the way in which you think about something before you do it, right? So like for me, for example, really simple, if I'm going somewhere that involves the train, I think about me getting on the train. And then if I think about that one time where that guy called me an abomination while I was getting on the train because I was wearing makeup, that stresses me out. And then I kind of spiral a little bit going, oh, is my safety going to be compromised if I go on the train? And maybe I'll take my car, or maybe I'll walk, or actually I won't go. It's these negative feelings that we feel before we do something that isn't necessarily related to our actual safety, because sometimes safety concerns are an actual concern, but sometimes we trick ourselves into feeling like something is not safe even when it is. So again, use your discernment and don't violate any boundaries that you have in place for yourself, and don't put yourself in dangerous situations. But of course, don't blame yourself if you put yourself in a dangerous situation, because it's hard to recognize it before it happens. Anyway, so this stimulus preceding negativity is really important, and I have such a great story for this. But one last thing. So the brainwave findings showed a larger stimulus preceding negativity during the feedback anticipation period and the near miss condition than the complete defeat condition. So this shows that participants were more intrinsically motivated to win when things are close, right? So it's this optimal zone of development. If you feel like you're going to be closer to reaching a goal versus like a million years away from reaching a goal, we're going to be more intrinsically motivated to work at that goal. So like in the beginning, when I said, don't think of a perfectionist, perfectly realized version of yourself as your goal, because if that's so far away from you, it's easy to feel that that negative stimulus preceding feeling where you just kind of talk yourself out of reaching any goal because it feels so far away. So this is important when you're goal setting, making them bite-sized, making them small steps of things that you can actually achieve. It's so important, because if you're looking down the barrel of a million steps, right, it's easy to kind of talk yourself out of even trying because you're just so far away. And my example of this, it again goes back to that grade 2 year. And this is really where I started to develop and hone my growth mindset skills, not only for me, but for my students. And I definitely learned it alongside my students, even though I was the leader. But that's all education is anyway. We're all learning. We were all learning together, as every teacher should be alongside their students. Anyway, I had this student who had probably one of the worst mindsets I had ever experienced in my entire life. This child was so hard on themselves all the time so hard All the time, they were so hard on themselves. They didn't think they could do anything. They thought they were dumb. There might have been some extenuating circumstances going on at home or maybe a mental health problem. But ultimately, but I had all the supports in place for this child to receive support, and nobody was really able to kind of quite nail down the problem. And of course, I had the presence of the parents, and there was open conversation and collaboration and all the rest. But this kid was just struggling so hard with their mindset. And I remember it was, I don't mean to laugh, but it was just one of the funniest moments of my teaching career so far, is that we had to set up breaks for this student, and they struggled particularly with their mindset in math. And the most frustrating thing is that they were so smart. Honestly, I'm going to look right into the camera and say that this kid was probably better at math than I was, but they just had such a bad mindset that they weren't actually able to access those skills, because when the stakes were low and the dopamine was high, this student was able to perform at a much higher level than grade 2. But it doesn't actually matter what you're capable of if you're not able to consistently deliver those results. And as a teacher, somebody who is involved with assessment, you have to be able to take that into account, because one assessment, one test is only that snapshot of a moment right there. And there's always so many circumstances. That's true for us too. In like learning, like if you're a performer or something, when I look at my performances and go, wow, that was really bad. Sometimes I take a step back and go, well, did I get a good sleep last night? What was my day leading up to this? Was I full of anxiety? Where was the show? How did I feel going into it? Did I have 2 Red Bulls on an empty stomach? Like, once you start to unravel the layers of why what happened, it's easy to blame yourself when you're actually not the one to blame. And I don't think this child in this example was the one to blame, but they were blaming themselves, and it was just so hard. Anyway, we would set up a lot of breaks with this student, and I was trying to get them to notice within themselves when they felt their lid flipping. And this is that transition between a growth mindset and a fixed mindset. And I wanted them to be able to recognize the differences between the two. And when they felt that emotion rising and they were about to flip to that fixed mindset, I wanted to put in triggers that they were able to just stand up, wink at me, and go take a walk. I can regulate students for them, but it's not super meaningful because they go home and I'm not there. They're going to leave at the end of the year and I'm not there. The whole point is to be able to instill these skills into the students so they're able to carry them on with themselves. And that's kind of what I'm attempting to do with you here. I want to try and give you all the information that I can, give you the skills that you're able to do this on your own, because ultimately I'm not in your house helping you with these things. I'm just a little voice in your phone. You're just a crazy person listening to me talk, right? Also, yeah, but thanks for being here. Crazy person. Love you. Anyway, this student would often go for a walk, take a break, come back in a reasonable amount of time, maybe 1 or 2 minutes. They'd go look at the fish tank, come back, continue, flawless. But it didn't always work like anything else in the world. Nothing works all the time, right? And maybe 2 minutes had passed, 3 minutes had passed, and I thought, ooh, he's been gone for a while. I'm going to go take a walk for him. And I couldn't find him. And I was a little bit panicked, but I thought, you know what, like maybe he found another teacher. He got pulled into another room. He's like helping somebody do something. There's so many possibilities of what could be happening. And I did one loop of the school and I couldn't find him. I'm like, okay, well, I'm going to do one more loop of the school and then I got to outsource some help here, Betsy, because I kind of lost a child. It's only been about 4 minutes that he's been gone at this point, so I'm not overly concerned, but I need to find this child because he's my student and I don't have a location on him. And then I did one more loop of the school and I'm headed back to my classroom to pick up the phone and talk to somebody in the office for help. And I look over and this kid had scrunched himself up in his own locker and he was sitting there, and instead of his coat hanging on his hook, his coat was backwards hanging off his head. So like his hood was on his face and the body of his coat was over his body, and he had his feet tucked up in the bottom. So it just looked like his coat was hanging there on his hook, but it was actually just him sitting there in his locker, completely camouflaged within all of the coats and backpacks of the rest of the students. And it just, oh God, that was such a moment. And it was such a moment for me because I was able to look at that kind of as the personification of that fixed mindset, because you're sitting there, you don't want to participate in anything. You think it's all your fault. You're being so hard on yourself. You don't want to exist in the space. You feel like everybody's looking at you. You're so hard on yourself. You're being so judgmental on yourself, and it doesn't actually get you anywhere. And sometimes that kind of behavior can make you invisible to other people as well, which is what happened in that moment. And I remember going up and sitting down beside him and going, hi. And he said, you could see me? I'm like, yeah, I can see you, pal. I was worried I couldn't find you. It's been like 6 minutes at this point. But anyway, I got him back But anyway, I got him back in and he did his math and whatever, had a good end to the year. But it's interesting how your behavior can just really, it's interesting how the ways you think about yourself can really influence the ways in which other people see you, but also the outcomes that you have for yourself. So this growth mindset is such an important thing. Finally, the performance-related feedback may influence intrinsic motivation. So if somebody's really bad at giving feedback, if somebody gives you shitty feedback or mean feedback, it can really kill your dopamine levels and it can have negative consequences. But in the same way, if the feedback you're giving to yourself is very negative, it can kill your dopamine levels, which in turn brings down the level of intrinsic motivation you feel when you're performing any given task. So for instance, positive feedback can enhance one's intrinsic motivation and negative feedback may undermine one's motivation. The frequency of performance-related feedback may affect one's neural processing. So this talks about your anterior cingulate gyrus, which is related to your task performance. So your anterior cingulate gyrus is a little tiny thing kind of right in the center of your brain. And it's like the stick shift. If you think about, like, I don't know if you know Cars, not the movie, the actual thing, but like a gear shift in a car, right? So the example of this of like somebody who's driving, if somebody cuts you off, you're like, oh, you're so mad. But if you have trouble letting go of that somebody cutting you off and it's like 10 minutes later and you still have a heightened sense of anger and anxiety because of that one person that cut you off that you're not even around anymore, and it happens to the best of us, you know, somebody does us wrong in some way and you just have trouble letting it go. I've been there, I get it. But your ACG is something that is directly responsible for your ability to be able to shift your brain from one thing to the other. So struggling with these mindset shifts can be, I'm not a psychiatrist, it can be a symptom of an attention disorder. So that's something to keep in mind too. If you are struggling with this mindset and you are so consistently hard on yourself, it might be worth going out of your way to receive the help or input from a counselor, from your GP, your general practitioner, your family doctor, or a psychiatrist, anybody. Find somebody that's licensed that can help you out. That's not me, because I'm not licensed and I'm just here to share my musings. Anyway, but yeah, so the kind of feedback that you give to yourself and others is so important in the way that you frame it, your tone, your facial expression, all of that stuff matters. Even if you don't think it does, because our brains are so evolved and able to recognize the smallest differences in the way that you speak, in the way that your body language is, in the way that your facial expressions are. It's an evolutionary thing, right? To be able to recognize if somebody is safe for you or not, right? It's this survival instinct kind of thing. And the human brain is able to recognize like micro expressions on your face, so like contempt when these two muscles pull up. Oh yeah, if you're listening on Spotify, if you just look at your mustache, yeah, because everyone has a mustache. It's like on the end of each mustache, maybe like right under the edge of each nose, it like picks up right there, and it's this, you know, if like a dog is getting mad, that's something that's definitely like you're just showing off the front teeth, but it's actually not showing off your teeth. That's just that I'm doing it in the monitor now. I can't really do it. I'm just smiling. But anyway, things like that, the human brain is able to recognize as contempt, and that makes us feel unsafe. But it's wild though, because if I'm giving you critiques and I have contempt for you while I'm giving you critiques, I might not even be able to recognize that I have contempt for you while I'm giving you critiques. And you might not be able to recognize that I have contempt for you while I'm giving you critiques, but your brain recognizes it, and then you feel unsafe, and then it kills your dopamine, and then your intrinsic motivation goes down, and then your growth mindset can go out the window. That's how small and fragile having a growth mindset can be. So please pay attention to yourself, be present within your body. It's just work on these skills. It's not a one size fits all, and it's not something that you're actually going to like obtain and be like, yeah, green check mark, I have a growth mindset. That's not how that works, but it can lead you to a happier life experience if you spend the time developing those skills. This has been a long one, girls, but we're going to finish here by talking about what a growth mindset is not. So we're going to have a look at an article by Stefan Jopik. And the title of this is called The Problem with the Growth Mindset. Let's read. This year, I had 2 exam periods that couldn't have been more different. During the first one, I was highly committed. I had to confront 5 exams in 4 days, which included studying the most difficult philosophical text I'd ever read, the entire history of Romance languages, and the grammar of the Portuguese conjunctivo. I don't know how to say that. But hey, I decided to make it work. Use it as an opportunity to grow, learn from my mistakes, and work hard. It didn't work. I felt constantly stressed, anxious, and tense. Worse, I determined my success on external factors. When I received grades below my expectations, I spiraled into doubt, felt disappointed. The thing that people called a growth mindset had become my greatest enemy. Then, for the second exam period, I tried the opposite. I ditched growth. I dropped one of my courses, dumped the topics that didn't fascinate me, and stopped caring about grades. Sure, some of the edginess was still there, but it had different qualities: ease, effortlessness, spontaneity. Paradoxically, I experienced growth despite not putting my mind to it. Ever since, I kept coming back to the same phenomenon. When I tried to grow, I didn't. When I stopped trying, I flourished. This dichotomy shows that the growth mindset deserves deeper examination. Here's what the growth mindset actually means, why it can be problematic, and what a more reasonable approach to growth might look like. So, like we talked about earlier in this podcast, there is a fake growth mindset. And I think the person who wrote this article is definitely exhibiting this idea of a fake growth mindset or a false growth mindset, because it's that negative stimulant response that I think they were feeling, especially when they said when they try to grow, they didn't. And when they stopped trying, they flourished, right? It's this idea of being hard on yourself for your mistakes that I think is personifying here in this story. Now, here are the problems that this person thinks exist within the growth mindset. Let's see if we agree with them. The first problem with the growth mindset is that it puts growth on a pedestal. It sneakily suggests that we should grow like bamboo on fertilizer, work harder, strategize more, get feedback more, then rinse and repeat. If we're not growing, this mindset implies we're fixed, stuck in place. And that's bad because we're not making progress towards our goals. No progress equals no growth, and no growth equals no good. I wonder if you're able to recognize the problems with this based off of what we've talked about so far, because I think this person is putting so much pressure on themselves and perhaps internalizing this capitalistic idea of always being able to recognize the growth, because so much happens in our brains that we're not able to recognize. And to be honest, thank God, that would be exhausting to be able to notice everything that happens in our life. But this thinking transforms into a cover-up strategy to stroke an ego with unmet needs. After all, isn't it that we find fulfillment in small, ordinary moments rather than in the hunt for the next big milestone? When can we stop growing and just be? The second problem with the growth mindset is that it doesn't allow for mediocrity. It can easily invoke pressure to grow in every aspect of life. As in, it's not enough to grow as a friend, a partner, or a parent. You should also get better at your job, your guitar skills, and your knitting project. It's a never-ending list of demands. I hope you're listening to this, hearing how problematic it is too, because I believe that this person is putting these false sense of achievement on themselves. Nobody's pressuring you to do all these things. In fact, you're putting it on yourself. And if you're not able to recognize the pressures that you put upon yourself, growth mindset is a bad thing because you're using it to bully yourself. The last problem that he talks about is that the growth mindset leaves little room for sorrow, disappointment, and other uncomfortable emotions. If the growth mindset were a person, its emotional support would look like this. Oh, that's too bad you failed the exam, but hey, I'm sure you'll learn a lot from this. Or, cheer up, it's just a depressive episode. Someday you'll look back on this and marvel at how much you've grown. Yeah, no. More often than not, we just need assurance that failure, rejection, and adversity suck, that we're not alone in these feelings, and that it's okay to be stuck. We don't need to jump back on the growth treadmill and optimize ourselves. And that instead, we're allowed to feel bad for a while and let the uncomfortable emotions pass through our system. Sometimes we have to take a few steps back to start walking in the right direction, which I completely agree with that last part. You have to be able to take space. You have to be able to be kind to yourself. You can wallow in that sorrow for a little bit. Like RuPaul says, you can look, but don't stare, right? Interesting. That person seemed really burned by the growth mindset. And it is true. If you go two balls to the wall with a growth mindset, it can really be a turnoff for you. So if it is something that you're going to try and work on, I encourage you to look at the research. There's lots of interesting new stuff coming out about the growth mindset, specifically how it relates to brain scans. And a lot of that research is readable to anybody. So I'm not really that far ahead than the everyman when it comes to reading that kind of research. So if that's something you're interested, I think you can definitely do that. But babies, to end this here, I just want to say a growth mindset, if you make it work for you, can be a step to living a life that is more enjoyable. It can be a tool that you can use in order to be less judgmental of yourself and to be able to recognize growth on a more deeper level. It can be a way for you to tune into yourself and to become more self-aware of your emotions, your body feelings, your judgments, all of those things. And really, the whole point of life is not only to grow, but it is to become so in tune with yourself that you're able to recognize everything that's going on with you in your body, in your emotions, in the way that you feel, in all the things, because you need to grow closer to yourself. The most important relationship that you have in this world is the one that you have with yourself. And the most valuable thing that you have is your brain, your literal brain. Your literal brain up here, the thing that has the consistency of soft butter, the thing that has the consistency of softened butter. I learned that my life was never the same. Did you know that? It's the consistency of soft butter. So take care of your brains, wear helmets on scooters. Anyway, that's going to be it for me here. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of D-Talk. I hope you really enjoyed it. Let me know what you think in the comments if you're watching this on YouTube, or leave a review if you're listening on Spotify. I really appreciate you being here. If you love the sound of my voice and you're interested in more from me, I do have a YouTube channel, if you didn't know if you're listening on Spotify, but I do have a YouTube series called Dismantling Hate, where I react to some hateful online rhetoric, so transphobia, homophobia, xenophobia, fat phobia, and we just discuss it and dismantle it in real time. It's really interesting. It's really entertaining. I'd love it if you come and join me over there. You can become a certified amateur sleuth. Click on my link tree and follow me on Instagram at david.they, or follow me on TikTok at david_they. Thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate that you listened to this whole thing. I love you, babes. You look great today. I hope I have inspired you to move towards a growth mindset. If it's something you haven't considered before, look into it. Come back to this episode if you need it. Thank you so much. I love you, babes. You look great today. And until the next one, goodbye.